Hey, this is Melisha and welcome to the Flipped Coding webinar. So Flipped Coding is the place people come after they've been through all of the online tutorials, but you're still looking for a little bit of mentorship or you want more insight to how the technical skills are actually used in industry. So in today's webinar, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about React. So you probably know that's one of the most popular JavaScript frameworks out right now. So with that being said, we're going to do a little background about what React is and why we use it, all that good stuff. Then we're going to jump straight into writing React, and I'll get you set up with Visual Studio Code, and we'll just walk through how to make a really simple React app. And with that being said, at the end of all my webinars, I like to give those of you who stick around and really commit to learning the stuff that we go over in the webinar, I like to give you a nice little offer at the end of the webinar. So stick around, learn how to use React, and then at the end, get your special reward. So with that being said, let's just jump in and start talking about some background on React. Let's start with some basics. So React is really just a JavaScript framework that makes it easier to work on the front end. All React is some fancy JavaScript. That's really all these frameworks are, but I want to make sure you understand that if you know how to write JavaScript and how to read JavaScript, picking up React is not going to be that difficult. Just my personal opinion. So, in case you're wondering who uses it to make it this popular, these are some of the biggest companies that are currently using React for their websites. So you have Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, WhatsApp, the New York Times. These are all some large companies that their whole web presence is built on React. And also, that's not including the medium-sized companies, the startups, the smaller companies, the random people who just want a React website. So there is a lot of use for React, and a lot of people are currently using it. So what makes it so popular, this is my little jab at Angular, but React is a lot easier to work with than just vanilla.js sometimes. It comes with so many methods and properties that it just makes it easy. And I work with Angular a lot at my day job, so I kind of take jabs at it from time to time, but React seems to be a little bit more streamlined than Angular, and it seems like the components are easier to work with because they are just all JavaScript. So that's one of the reasons why React is so popular. Now here's why you should bother learning it, and probably why you showed up for this webinar in the first place. So in case you don't know about how badly React developers are needed right now, I want you to take a minute and just do a quick Google search for React developer jobs. So after those results load, I want you to just scroll through and see how many jobs are open and what the salary ranges are for them. That's what you get out of knowing React, if that's your goal. I know some people just want to learn it just because it's something new or something different than they use at work, but if this is one of the reasons you're learning React, as you can see, becoming a React developer is not a bad career decision. And like I said earlier, if you're not in it for the career thing, then it is kind of interesting and fun to learn. So now we're done with all of the background we're going to do on React. Let's just jump straight into the code. Whoops, sorry about that. We actually do have a little bit of work we have to do before we just jump straight into the code. So in case you don't already have Node.js installed, you want to go ahead and do that. So just go to nodejs.org, go to the downloads, and pick whichever version works for your operating system. It's free, so just download it, let it install, and you will have Node.js on your computer. Then, if you want to use the same IDE that I use, Visual Studio Code is a really good one. It's what I use at work. It's what I use for my side projects. I just like this IDE. And you can use it on any OS you have. It's free. All the good stuff that comes with it. You can even contribute to it if you want to get some coding practice. So for now, go ahead and download and install these things if you don't have them, or if you just want to use Visual Studio Code. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. And what we are going to do is come up here and click this little explorer. And we're going to open a new folder that we will use to hold the files for our React app. So the folder you're about to make, you need to make sure you know exactly where it is, because this is where your project is going to be. So we're going to go ahead and click open folder, and I'm going to right click and make a new folder, and I'm going to call this project order tracker. You can call it whatever you like, but basically we're building a small system that we'll use to track orders customers make. And the reason we're making something like this is because it's common functionality that you'll see when you get into the web development industry. We'll learn how to make lists and how to handle different user data. So you're going to learn some stuff you'll actually use when you get a job as a web developer. So I'm going to go ahead and save that folder, open it, and this is the folder we're going to use. Alright, so now what we're going to do is, see, this is a cool thing about VS Code. You can actually go up here to View and go down to Terminal, and it just brings up a terminal right inside of Visual Studio Code. It's a small thing, but I like it. And those little pop-ups will happen from time to time. But now we're about to make our React app. And it's a lot easier than you might think. We're just going to run one command, and it's going to flesh out the app for us. So inside of the terminal, you're going to type npx, and then we're going to use the create React app. If I can type right, create React app library. And after this, we have to give the app a name. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with the folder name and call this order tracker. So once you hit enter, you'll see it's about to kick off a lot of downloads and install a bunch of stuff for us. And we did that with just this one line of code. So this calls something from Node, and it uses this package, and it makes an app called Order Tracker. And right now what it's doing, it's installing all the packages and libraries it needs to actually run a React app. The main thing that I really want you to take away from this is to not feel like an imposter or feel like you're cheating or taking a shortcut by making a React app like this. It takes an incredible amount of time to make a React app just from scratch, because you have to set up all of the dependencies, you have to figure out which packages to use. There's just a lot that goes into building a React app from scratch. And there's no reason for you to do it, because you have things like this create React app package that automatically sets up kind of a template project for you. All of the folders, for the most part, are in place. It gives you something to start with. As soon as this download is done, we can actually jump straight into running a React app. We haven't written one bit of code, but as soon as this download is done, we'll be able to run an app like we've spent all day writing it. Of course, it's not going to have a lot in it, but it is a good template to start with. And while it's still downloading, another thing, sometimes when you install new packages or you have to update packages, it'll take a little while for it to install. You see how many files we have left over here, but find something else to do. That's usually what we do in industry. So if you know you have an install that's going to take 5 minutes, you might get up and stretch, or this could be the perfect time to take a break. You could check emails, go ask the question you've been waiting on all day. Just use that time productively. You don't want to sit there and just stare at the screen waiting for all the pound signs to get to the other side. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I'm planning on answering them, so don't miss the chance to get your specific questions answered. And yeah, I'm kind of trying to fill the time while this is downloading. It just takes a while sometimes. Yeah. I guess another thing you should know about React is that there are certain packages that you'll see most companies use. Like Moment.js is the main package you'll use to work with dates and times and do stuff with calendars, like set appointments or schedule visits, things like that. Then another thing you'll want to look into after you get really comfortable with React is the Redux, framework. So that's really important for when you get into things like state management and your projects are getting a lot more complicated than they once were. Oh, I think we're done. Woo! It only took, all right, it just decided to kick us down here. So let's go ahead and start our React app. The first thing you need to do though, if you notice up here, it gives you some instructions on what to do next. What it has done, we are inside of our order tracker folder, but the Create React App package made another order tracker folder with all of these different files in it. So this is our template project that's going to run. So we have to make sure in the terminal we're in the right folder. So we're going to cd into the order tracker, and that's taking us inside of this folder. I know that's a little bit confusing since we have two folders with the same name, but you just want to be inside of the second one because that's the one that holds all of our project files. And now that we're in our project, we're going to do what it told us. We're going to run yarn start and see what happens. So what it's doing right now is, well, all right, it just decided we're starting. So what yarn start does, it compiles the code, builds it, and gets it ready to serve in the browser. Most of the time you'll see it on localhost 3000 too. So now we just wait and voila. You are officially running a React app on your computer, and you have access to all of the code behind it. There's one last thing that we need to do before we start just hacking away at the code. Go ahead and open a new tab and search for the Chrome Web Store. It's an extension that we need to download so that we'll be able to really debug our React app as we build it. So up here in the search, you're going to type React Developer Tools and go ahead and install this top one right here. It's going to ask if you can add the extension. Now you have it. And if we go back, you can close out of that extension. But if we go back to our React app running and refresh the browser, you'll see our extension has been activated, and that means when you open the developer tools, so just hit F12 and it'll bring something like this up. And usually I like to pop mine out it's easier for me. But if you look over here, you'll see this React tab. And this is the exact code you'll find inside of our files here. Which, now that we have all of our tools set up, we're going to start working on the code. So get ready, take a break, stretch, breathe, whatever you want to do before you become a React developer, because now you're about to learn what we actually do. So let's write some code. So the first thing we're going to do is open up the app.js file. And just a quick heads up, we're not going to get super heavy into the HTML stuff, so this is going to be a really, really simple React app, but it's going to show you all of the things you need to know to start building those more complex apps. The first thing we're going to do is change this app into a component. So in React, most of the time you'll see people working with components instead of functions. But there are some places that follow, the functional programming design. So just attempted to fix a few formatting things, but it doesn't matter because we're going to delete all of this later anyways. So first thing we're going to do, you can go ahead and delete this logo. We don't need it. We can leave all of this stuff the same for now. Except we need to import one more thing from the React library. We're going to import this component. And what this does, it's going to let us use the component class, which has a lot of methods and properties that make working with React a lot easier. So now what we're going to do is change this function into a class. And we do that by literally changing it into class. And then over here, we're going to get rid of those parentheses, and it's going to extend component. So if you don't quite understand what this extends is doing, it's something, basically it's saying, hey, this is my class. I want to use the methods and properties in this class, so let me. That's a nutshell of what extends is doing. And like I said, we're going to go ahead and delete all of this out. So don't feel bad. We do this all the time. Go ahead and delete that out. And now this is what an empty React component looks like. So you will always import the React library at a minimum. And most of the time you might have some CSS to import, maybe not. Depends on the component and where it is in the project. And then we'll always have our class declaration like this. And down here, don't forget this. It's really easy to leave off. So we need to export this component so that we can import it in other components like we do here. So always use this export default on the components that you know you're going to need to use somewhere else, which in most cases, you're always going to need this export statement. So now we're going to go ahead and add a few things inside. But first, let me explain what we're making. So, like I said, this is going to be a really, really basic React app because we don't have all day and I don't want to hold you up all night with, writing HTML and CSS. So what we're making is basically a button that's going to say, click here to add order. And when you do that, it's going to give you a message that says, order has been added or something like that. Now that sounds really simple, but wait until you see how we do it in React. So the first thing we're going to do in our app component is make the constructor method. So constructors are the first thing run whenever your component loads on a page. So this is where you'll set up any initial variable values you need. you'll call any APIs or other functions you need to get the component ready to show on the screen. And you'll see this super method a lot, because what this does, it gives us access to that weird this variable keyword. Yeah, it just gives us access to the this object of the component. And the reason we need that is so we can work with the component state. So what the state is, it's basically a set of values that dictate how the component functions. That's a real nutshell version of it, but it's a pretty good description. It's an object that holds values that describe the state of the component, like what should be showing, what does the user need to do. That's what the state is for. And what we're going to put in here is this has been added value, or variable as we call it sometimes. And we're going to set it to false. This is just a Boolean value, and it's a part of the state object. So whenever we reference state, we can just use the dot, and the has been added value will show up as false. That's it for the constructor right now. And what we'll do is go ahead and make the function for when we click our button. You'll see how it ties together when we make our other component, but for now let's write this function. We're going to write a function called update show status. It's not going to take any parameters, and the only thing it's responsible for is setting the state to an updated value. Or at least that's all we're going to use it for. So we are going to take the state and set it to the opposite of whatever it is right now. When it's really tempting to just go in here and update the state, you know, like this dot has been added equals whatever, but this is the worst possible thing you can do in React. Never ever directly access the state. That's because in a lot of projects, the state gets shared between multiple components. So you don't want a component to just directly change the state, because it's going to have an effect on the other components and you might not want it to. That's why you always use this set state method whenever you want to make a change to the state. It does the exact same thing as directly updating the value, but it is basically like a fail-safe so that you see exactly where the state has been updated. You see what's been happening, and you don't have to worry about these random variables getting thrown into your state. So that's what we're doing here. And basically what's going to happen is whenever a user clicks on our add order button, it's going to toggle this state, and it'll decide whether we need to show the order has been added message or not. All right, the last thing we're going to do, almost the last thing. Oh, that's a good point. I almost forgot something. In React, you have to do this thing called binding. So when you write a function inside of a component, this part of the function doesn't automatically have access to this object for the component. And the way we give it access to this is by doing this binding thing that React likes. So it's really simple. It's just the hardest thing is remembering to do it. So if you ever have an error and you don't know why, always make sure that you look for this binding. Oh, typed that wrong. There we go. So we bind it. Oh, typed that wrong. Sorry. So we bind it this, to our update show status, which means this, and this are the same. They hold the same state. Whew. Okay. So now we're going to do the last thing for our app component, and that's calling the render method. Now, this is where you'll type all of your HTML and put all your classes, all that good stuff in, because this is what React uses to create a component on the screen. The important thing, you always return a value, but you have to return what's called a simple expression. So in our case, that's going to be really easy because we're going to do a thing that you haven't seen yet. We're going to reference our order component before we make it. Ta-da! So when you save this and update it, I'm pretty sure you'll get an error. But anyways, while we wait for that to compile, what we've done here, see, orders is not defined, so we have to make this component, which we'll do right after we finish this render. So what we're doing here, we're going to use what are called props in React and pass in this state value. So in React, you have a really interesting way of handling values across different components. And the standard way to do it is through states and props. So you'll set a state in a parent component. In our case, the app component is our parent and the orders component is the child of the app component. What that means is we take the state from our parent component and we're going to pass it into the props of our child component. And props are really easy to use. It's like making another HTML attribute basically. And we'll just pass in, I hate it when it does that autocomplete thing sometimes, but we'll just pass in this state, has been added, and we'll pass in our method actually. And we do these things, so pretend we had different components here. Let's say we had 3 or 4 of these orders. That would mean all of these components share this same state. So whenever this one value gets updated, the rest of the components will. That's the importance of using state. Now with that, we have these props, which look like these attributes that are on this component. And all we're doing is giving them the local value of these values or variables or functions or whatever you need to pass in. In our case, we pass in a function and we pass in a Boolean value. And just like that, we are done with the app component. So go ahead and save that. Still going to give you an error because we haven't made the order component. So let's go ahead and do that. So make a new file and we're going to save this as orders.js. I'm a little paranoid, so I always like to put that in there. All right, so go ahead and save that and go ahead and make another new file and save this as orders.css. Okay. All right, now we have our new component file and its style sheet. First thing we're going to do is import the React library. And while we're at it, we know we're making a component, so go ahead and import that component part. And then from React, don't forget the semicolon. Then we're going to go ahead and import our CSS file, and we'll do that just by using, regular file paths. If you need an example, same thing, because it's all in the same source directory. Okay, so we've done our imports. So the next thing we need to do is make our class. So class orders, make sure you extend the component and go ahead and make that export statement. I always do it at the beginning so I don't have to worry about it later and I know it's there. Now let's go ahead and just jump straight into the component. So this one is a lot simpler than our app component was. We're just going to go straight to the render method because we know the HTML we need to put out and we have all the values and functions we need for this component. So we're going to return, if I can type right today. Okay, we're going to go ahead and return some HTML, which is actually a JSX expression. So don't be fooled into thinking this is just regular HTML, and I'll show you why it's not in just a second. Right here, actually. So we're going to use the on-click expression to call in our function from the props. Props dot update show status. So we're calling in this function, the update show status, from the props, which we get from the app component right here. That leads us back here. Okay, just want you to know how we got here. And we're going to go ahead and close that div and just type click to add order. Okay, now the next div is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So we're going to do just regular div. I'm going to go ahead and close this element. Inside our div, we're going to say your order has been added. But that's not the interesting part. Now, we're going to see the difference between JavaScript, HTML, and JSX. So in JSX, you can't just use the class attribute because that's used right here. Can't use it again. So in this case, we're going to use the class name attribute, which is pretty special to React. Just be aware of that whenever you're writing JSX code, because if you just type class here, it's gonna not behave like you expect. The first thing we're gonna do, we haven't made the styles yet, just in case you're wondering, but this is the first thing we'll do. We're going to make a class name expression first off. Then we're gonna go ahead and type in one of our classes. Make sure you put this space right here. That's going to be important. Then you're going to go ahead and do the concat syntax. And this is where it gets interesting. So inside of here, we're going to bring in a variable. We're going to make a ternary statement.